We all have one. We use it pretty much every single day. But do we really actually know how it works? I'm talking about our moral conscience. So today, we're going to pop open the user's manual for this thing, this essential tool that guides our every decision. Let's get right to it and ask the most basic question of all. I mean, it all boils down to this, doesn't it? Every day, in all sorts of ways, big and small, we have to make a call. What's the right thing to do here? This is the fundamental problem our conscience is built to solve. Okay, let's make this super practical. Just imagine this. You're heading into work, you go to grab your ID card, and oh no, it's not there. And you see the security guard walking towards you. So what do? Do you tell a little white lie, just say you're a visitor to get in quick? Or do you own up, tell the truth, and just deal with whatever hassle comes next? That little debate firing up in your head right now, that's your conscience in action. So what exactly is this thing, this internal mechanism that helps us navigate these kinds of moments? Let's get a really clear definition and figure out how to identify this internal compass that we all seem to have. All right, so let's get precise here. Our sources define conscience not as some vague gut feeling or an emotion, but as a specific act of the intellect. In other words, it's a rational judgment. It's a thought process that ends with a conclusion. This action is good or this action is bad. And this is cool. Even the word itself gives us a huge clue. Conscience comes from the Latin consciere, which literally means to know with oneself. It points to this idea that our conscience is a deeply personal, internal kind of knowledge. It's a form of self-awareness about the rightness or wrongness of our own actions. And that leads us to its most important job. See, we might all agree on a big general moral rule, like lying is wrong. But how does that rule apply to this specific moment with the security guard? Well, conscience is the bridge. It's the mediator. It takes that universal law and applies it to the messy, real-world, concrete situation you're in right now. Okay, so if it's a rational process, how does it actually function? What are the gears doing? Let's kind of pop the hood and take a look at the internal mechanics, the step-by-step logic that your mind goes through to make a moral judgment. So here's the whole assembly line. It all starts with something called Synderesis, which is just that built-in universal sense that we should do good. Then we pull in our moral knowledge, the stuff we've learned, like lying is a bad thing. Next, Prudence kicks in, which is where we analyze the specifics of the situation, the guard, the forgotten ID, the potential consequences. It's only after all those steps that our conscience makes that final call, that final judgment. Okay, telling the truth here is the right thing to do. Let's just zoom in on that first step for a second, Synderesis. I know, it's a technical term, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Think of it as your moral operating system. It's the hardwired, pre-installed software that just knows, on a basic level, that we ought to do good things and we ought to avoid bad things. This is the starting point for everyone. But what happens when the system glitches? Because let's be honest, like any tool, our conscience is not perfect. It can be wrong. So let's move into the troubleshooting guide section of our manual and see how we can figure out when our conscience might be leading us down the wrong path. First off, we can think about conscience based on its timing. There's what's called the antecedent conscience. That's the voice that speaks up before you do something, guiding you. But then there's the consequent conscience, which is the judgment that comes after you've already acted. That's the one that either gives you a sense of peace or that nagging feeling of guilt. And second, we can judge its accuracy. Is it right or wrong? A true conscience is one that lines up with the actual moral law. But an erroneous conscience, well, it gets it wrong. It might mistakenly call a bad act good, or a good act bad. And according to our sources, the main reason for this is simply ignorance. Okay, this leads us to some absolutely critical rules of the road. And the first one is huge. You are only required to follow a conscience that is sure and certain. You can't act on a moral hunch or a vague guess. You have to be certain. And the flip side of that coin is just as important. If you're in a state of doubt, if you genuinely are not sure whether something is right or wrong, you are morally obligated not to act. Why? Well, think about it. To act when you're in doubt is to willingly risk doing something you know might be evil. Your duty in that moment is to stop and resolve the doubt first. So, what about that ignorance we talked about? The source makes a really important distinction here. If your conscience is wrong because of vincible ignorance,
which basically means you could have and should have known better if you just put in a little effort, then you can't just say, oh, I was just following my conscience. You're actually responsible for that error. So all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most practical part of our user's manual, maintenance and upgrades. If our conscience can be wrong, how do we actively train it to be right? How do we form it so that it becomes a more reliable guide?
And this, right here, might be the biggest takeaway of the whole thing. A well-formed conscience doesn't just happen by accident. It isn't passive. The sources are clear. It's an active duty, a lifelong responsibility. It takes real, conscious effort to go out and find the truth, to gain moral knowledge, and to get good at applying it.
And thankfully, we're not left in the dark about how to do this. The sources give us a clear roadmap. It means studying moral teachings, reading from wise sources, and learning from the experiences and mistakes of others. It also means talking to and seeking advice from people you trust to be prudent. And, maybe most importantly, actively training yourself in the virtues until doing the right thing becomes second nature.
So, we'll end with a question for you to think about. When it comes to your own life, is your conscience a tool that you are actively and deliberately sharpening, or is it one you're just kind of letting rust? Based on everything we've looked at, the choice and the responsibility is all yours.